So, with the release of the brand new Madam Web, it really got me thinking about what are the quintessential worst comic book movies ever made, worst superhero movies ever made. Because there's a lot of people making the argument right now and having the conversation that Madam Web is possibly the worst that we've ever had. So I went ahead and I kind of typed up a list of movies that at least I think are the worst of the worst. Now, I do have some standards that needed to be reached to make this list, some things I want to get through before I actually go into the movies. But I just want to say that I had a lot of options. This is a genre that has no shortage of really stinky movies. So for this list, I kind of wanted to do something different. I didn't want to just talk about the standard bad movies. First off, in my last video that I made, my last big list, I made a video breaking down the worst movie sequels ever. I'll clip it right here. And there are a couple superhero movies on that list. Movies that I'm not going to talk about again here. So movies like Batman and Robin, some of the bad X-Men movies. I'm not going to rehash that stuff here. But yeah, those movies are some of the worst ever. Also, Madam Web's not on this list because I feel like it's too soon to put it on a list like this. So yeah, I got 10 of them. They're in no particular order. We'll get right into it. But before I do that, please make sure to subscribe. I make content every single day covering movies, TV, video game, pretty much anything nerdy. I cover it here, make a lot of videos, shorts. So please make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, do all that stuff. It really helps me out. All right, let's just jump right in. First off, we have Superman 4 and the Quest for Peace. Now, I gotta be honest, before I really trash this movie, I haven't seen this movie in years, but I felt like I couldn't make this list unless I brought this movie up, because this is what a lot of people believe is to be, not just one of the worst comic book movies ever, but one of the worst movies ever. This movie is coming off a relatively successful Christopher Reeve Superman trilogy, which of course opened with one of the greatest movies ever in the first Superman. This is a trilogy that was extremely successful, and of course you get the fourth movie. And this movie is just not anywhere near what those movies had accomplished. This movie is essentially about Superman trying to stop nuclear annihilation. He's throwing warheads into space, he's kind of going country to country and removing the threat of nuclear weapons, which is kind of like weirdly not Superman-like. Like, why would, like, Superman, I feel like outside of the Injustice version of Superman, is not usually getting involved in like world affairs like that. But either way, this movie's just a mess. There's a weird plotline with like Lex Luthor creating like a weird evil Superman out of nukes. I don't know, I might just be remembering that wrong, but I think there was something like that here. This is a movie that just doesn't work from start to finish. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I'm not really a fan of a lot of the older Superman movies, except for the original, but this is one that definitely had to be talked about here. Next, because I can't talk about Batman and Robin since I covered it in a previous video, how about Batman Forever, the first Joel Schumacher Batman adventure with Val Kilmer at the helm playing Batman. What a weird movie. This is a movie that I can't help but love. I'm not gonna lie to you. I enjoy the hell out of this movie. I watch it all the time. But not because it's good, but because it's so goofy, and Jim Carrey is so hilariously stupid in this movie that I just can't help but have a good time with it. Tommy Lee Jones as Two-Face, really poor casting, but hilarious in this film. This movie's just a mess. It's really goofy. The whole thing was made to kind of, connect with families and younger audiences after the extremely dark Batman Returns by Tim Burton, which is a much better movie. But ultimately, this movie was a mess, and it was just kind of setting the table for what would be an atrocious Batman and Robin. I mean, altogether, I really don't like Joel Schumacher's vision for Batman. This kind of like neon-lit, party city type world of Gotham, where Batman's just super goofy and funny, but not in like an MCU goofy and funny way, but just in like a generic, kind of like Adam West, but even dumber sort of Batman way. It just doesn't work. It's not what people who like Batman are going to Batman movies to see. It's not what people who like comic book movies are going to, to see with comic book stuff. But I will say, Jim Carrey's a lot of fun here. Next up is Thor Love and Thunder, one of the more recent comic book movies on this list. Directed by Taika Waititi, Thor Love and Thunder is the first ever fourth standalone movie in the MCU. Of course, it stars Chris Hemsworth, Christian Bale as the villain. How the hell did they pull that off? This is also the first Thor movie which kind of completely took a lot of the focus away from Thor and Loki and the brotherly relationship. Loki is not in this movie at all, meaning that they really had to focus in on Thor and tell like a really emotional center character arc with him, which is hard to do, especially because we've had 3 Thor movies and 3 or 4 Avengers movies, which all kind of deal with Thor and his story, and he's kind of gone through a complete character arc, and, the other 2 major MCU characters in Iron Man and Captain America, once their arcs were completed, they fucked off. One died, the other one got old and also probably died. This character, though, is still hanging around and probably shouldn't be getting another movie, but he did, and the movie just doesn't work. The movie brings back Natalie Portman as Mighty Thor, Lady Thor, Jane Foster, who gets the powers of Thor, and she's just not very good in this movie. Not Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman's fine. She does the best she could do with the script that she was given here, but her character in this movie is so goofy and so stupid, and it's never really fleshed out enough for you to really care about her. This movie also took the premise that was promised at the end of Avengers Endgame, the Asgardians of the Galaxy, a movie or a story with Thor and the Guardians, and just completely threw it in the trash can. I mean, we completely miss out on having any of that sort of fun storytelling that we hope to get at the end of Endgame, and instead we get just like a goofy opening where Thor is just a comedic waste of a character that just doesn't work. Christian Bale, who I still can't believe signed up to do this movie, actually does a good job, you know, trying his best to make Gore an interesting character, and Gore the God Butcher should have been a cool character. This weird, like, bounty hunter, you know, out for revenge, killing gods. That could be so cool, but he ends up just becoming kind of like a CGI laughable villain. He's just stupid. He's easily beaten. I do like his world, like the black and white stuff that Taika did. I thought that all looks cool, but this movie is just way too goofy, and it's not funny. That's the issue. Thor Ragnarok was able to be funny. Taika was able to get all of his comedy in there while also telling a really heartwarming family story, which is really what the Thor story is at its core. It's a story about family. So it told the story about family while also building up the universe, while also living in logic, while also just delivering comic book fans what they want. This movie just completely misses all of that. It doesn't give you a nice emotional story to hook your teeth into. It doesn't give you good action. It gives you a lot of bad CGI. It doesn't really expand the world at all, at least in any meaningful ways. And when it ends, it's just kind of forgettable and bad, and probably the worst MCU movie ever. Next up is Justice League 2017. Now let me just preference something. All right, this movie at its core is not terrible. It's just a standard comic book movie. If we were to just look at it basic level, Justice League, yeah, it's a whatever film. But when you actually look at the truth of this movie, which I'm not going to get so into because everybody knows the story at this point, but the story of Joss Whedon coming in after Zack Snyder left the project after the tragic death of his daughter, and Joss Whedon decided to reshoot like 80% of the movie, re-edit the entire thing, insert all of his goofiness and just terribleness into the Zack Snyder story, and create this hogswash mess of a paella. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. Just this mess of a movie that doesn't connect at all to the previous tones of the universe, or even some of the tones in the own movie. You have all these characters that just don't work at all because they're just rushed together with no coherent thematic plot line really, you know, connecting them at all. You get the worst version of Batman I think we've ever gotten. We get a really dull Wonder Woman. Flash, Cyborg, and Aquaman don't really do much in the film. Superman's character arc makes absolutely no sense and feels completely rushed, and Steppenwolf, the villain here, is dog shit. It's just such a bad arc. But I will say some of the music is fine, the action's fine, but the real crime here is the fact that this movie was ripped out of what was an epic 3.5-hour adventure that Zack Snyder was crafting with the Zack Snyder Justice League movie. And listen, I'm not the biggest Zack Snyder ass kisser. I know there's a lot of people out there, it doesn't matter what that man makes, they will love it, and I respect them for that. I'm not one of them. I didn't like Rebel Moon, I didn't really like Army of the Dead, you know, I'm not the biggest Zack Snyder guy, especially with his DC stuff. But the Snyder Cut of Justice League is terrific. It is a great, epic superhero film, and the fact that they decided to trash that with this makes this one of the worst comic book movies ever, and one of the worst things that Hollywood has really just done in general. It was really terrible how they handled the situation. Next up is Fan Force Stick. Now, it's gotta be Fan Force Stick. The fact that we call it Fan Force Stick is insulting to the film genre because they had to do that stupid fucking title card. Now, this movie nearly killed the Fantastic Four. This movie was only made because Fox wanted to hold on to the rights to Fantastic Four a little bit longer, and they had some sort of agreement that they had to make a movie like every 10 years or they lost the rights. Lo and behold, they would sell the rights back a few years later to Marvel, but God, this movie sucks. This movie, I actually think, unfortunately, it did have some, you know, promise. It had some potential. When you have Josh Trank who directed it, Josh Trank, who I know a lot of stuff has come out about him since. He's apparently a very nasty person who's hard to work with. I can't corroborate any of those, you know, claims. I don't know him. But he's a director that actually has made some really good stuff in the past, and he had a vision for this movie that was clearly ripped apart by the studio afterwards. There is a Josh Trank cut of this movie in some vault somewhere, and maybe it's good. We'll never see it, but maybe it's fine. But the movie has a great cast. You have Miles Teller, you have Michael B. Jordan. I really enjoyed the cast here. I think the guy that played Dr. Doom was really great, and some of the ideas they had for the Doom character were sort of cool. I know a lot of people hate it, but that scene where Doom is kind of like walking through hallways and people's heads are just exploding, I thought was pretty cool at the time. Outside of that, the movie's an incoherent mess. The entire movie essentially takes place in like a lab where they're just kind of like studying different things and like studying their powers, and none of the characters really feel organic. The script here doesn't do them any favors. They all kind of feel thrown together. They don't have very good chemistry whatsoever. The CGI is really poor. How they get their powers doesn't really work. How Doom gets his powers really doesn't work. The score is not memorable. There's a weird time jump that makes absolutely no sense. The final fight is so rushed and so bad and doesn't make any sense. This movie's a disaster, and everybody knows it, and it was made just to make a couple few bucks and to keep the rights of Fantastic Four. That was the entire reason Fan Four Stick was made, and thank God we'll be getting this movie next year, and I have faith that the MCU will pull this one off, because Pedro Pascal played Mr. Fantastic. Why not? He gets everything. Give him another. I'm gonna take bets right now when they make this movie, The Brave and the Bold, right? For DC. I'm taking my bets right now. Pedro Pascal is gonna be Batman. Taking my bets. Next up is gonna be a Sony Spider-Verse movie. Now, I'm gonna be careful here because it would be very easy of me to just say Madam Web or Morbius. But you know what? I'm gonna go out of the box a little bit. I'm gonna say Venom #2, whatever it's called. Let There Be Carnage or something like that. Now I can already hear the uproar. It's not that bad of a movie. It's fine. It's a standard comic book movie. Okay, maybe, yes, but you have to understand something, all right? This is a movie about Venom versus Carnage. How is this not one of the best comic book movies ever? Now, we as comic book fans waited so long to see Carnage adapted to the big screen, like literally years and years and years of rumors of when we would finally see him. He's one of the most sadistic and awesome characters. He looks so cool. And you could tell a really dark, R-rated story with that character, whether it's with Spider-Man, Venom, whoever. There's a lot you could do there. And finally, we're getting a Venom versus Carnage movie. And what do? They give us Woody Harrelson, who I love. But when I imagined Cletus Cassidy, when I imagined Carnage, I was not imagining Woody Harrelson doing shit like this. And I will say, Woody Harrelson definitely puts a lot of effort into this role. He definitely tries, and he looks like he's having a lot of fun. And Tom Hardy, obviously very passionate about Venom. He gives it his all as well. So the cast are not the problem. The script is just so rushed, and it doesn't give you a real reason to care about Carnage or the conflict between the two characters at all. And by the time the movie's like, you're like 20 minutes into the movie and you feel like you're already ramping up to the third act. This movie is paced way too fast, and it gets to the end with no real story before you're even ready for it. And then the final fight, just a big CGI mess, which of course, what do you expect? It's Venom and Carnage. You can't do it practically. But I just wish there was something more to this. Also, the lighting in the last act is kind of poor. I feel like the lights to see the bright red on Carnage wasn't really there. I wish he was a brighter, sort of vibrant red that really stuck out, and instead it's just kind of a little bit of a darker, it's like a blood red, which I guess makes sense for Carnage, but I don't know. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore, but I would have liked it to be a little bit better. It's a Venom Carnage movie, and it just kind of stunk up the theaters and was just a mediocre disaster. Not a disaster, but a mediocre film that should have been a lot better. All right, we got two films that came out last year. First up, we're going to talk about The Flash. Now, why is The Flash one of the worst movies, one of the worst comic book movies ever? Well, thank you for asking. It's because they decided to take the greatest comic book storyline ever written, the greatest comic book arc ever in Flashpoint, and adapt it in the film in the worst possible way. Flashpoint is a great story, a story that probably deserves a much bigger movie, maybe a Justice League movie that's split into two parts to really do it justice. It's this epic story that involves the Amazons fighting the Atlanteans. You have Professor Zoom, aka Reverse Flash, for people that watch the Flash TV show. You have Thomas Wayne Batman, who has such an emotional arc about learning that in the proper universe, his son actually lived and became Batman, and it's so good. This is like the skeletons of what Flashpoint could possibly be. Instead of getting Amazons versus, Atlanteans, we get Zod coming down. Instead of getting Superman, we get a random version of Supergirl who just has no emotional value to the audience. Instead of Thomas Wayne Batman, we get Michael Keaton Batman, because for some reason they thought people would be really nostalgic about Michael Keaton 30 years since he's played the character last. And guess what? Nobody was. Nobody was excited to see a 70-year-old freaking Batman running around. What we wanted was Jeffrey Dean Morgan playing Thomas Wayne Batman. You missed it. You blew it. We get Ezra Miller, who everybody just kind of dislikes. He's just like a terrible human being. He actually is okay in this movie. He's entertaining for the most part, but it's just really goofy, and it never really works. And in the whole arc of, like, the bad Barry, the good Barry, what happens at the end with, like, that shadowy Flash thing, it just never really connects at all. It doesn't work. The final fight, there's some good ideas there, but it just ends up being a gigantic CGI mess, and a lot of the CGI in this movie is some of the poorest stuff I've ever seen. That stupid cameo fest at the end where you see Nick Cage and all these other people come in is laughably bad. It's so insulting, and it's kind of where the comic book movie genre is at this point. But overall, the fact that this movie took one of the greatest comic book arcs ever and decided to make it into this it's just kind of depressing and really insulting to somebody who really loves that story, and I hope James Gunn in the future will give Flashpoint another shot, a proper shot in the future, because it deserves a big live-action epic movie. And another movie from last year, arguably, if this was in order, would probably be number 1 for me, Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumanium. What a shit show. This movie made me mad when I was watching it in theaters, because it's such a waste of time and energy for everybody involved, because there's a lot of talented people involved in this movie, that it kind of made me mad that they insulted the intelligence of their audience by putting out a movie like this. This movie is a disaster. This movie is 99% green screen and terrible CGI green screen. Like, every visual in this movie looks like it was shit out of one of the worst video games you could ever play, let alone a movie. The visuals of this movie takes Hollywood about 20,000 steps back from where they should be, from something like Avatar. Everything that worked about the first 2 Ant-Man movies, the family vibes, the small scale of the story, the comedy with Michael Peña's character and all the stuff that happens there, the really nice relationship between the father and daughter aspect, all of that stuff, the really interesting ways they use the shrinking tech, all of that stuff is missing from this. It's just completely missing. The father-daughter dynamic doesn't really feel organic in this one, because Catherine Newton and Paul Rudd really just don't have great chemistry together. The family aspect with everybody else, like Hope Van Dyne and Paul Rudd, they just don't really have like any chemistry together whatsoever. The rest of the family vibes with Hank Pym and Hope, their whole story arc just doesn't even come close to anything they did in previous movies. They just seem that like they're here because they had to be here. They just don't fit into the plot that they were trying to tell at all. Michael Peña, completely missing. They just didn't use his character at all. The whole plotline of stopping Kang on paper probably sounded really cool, and I will say Jonathan Majors is fine as Kang. Doesn't fucking matter now because the dude's an asshole. But yeah, he was fine. The way they beat him in the 3rd act was kind of dumb. Can you imagine they beat Thanos in the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie when he showed up for the first time? That would have been pretty stupid and would have made Infinity War and Endgame nowhere near as good. But they beat him right away, and then the movie just kind of ends, and it accomplished absolutely nothing for the universe or for its characters. It's a bad movie. Next up is Green Lantern, the Ryan Reynolds starred Green Lantern movie. Wow, what an interesting one. This movie was supposed to launch a DC universe before the Snyderverse. This was going to be the brand new DC cinematic universe. And wow, it just completely failed at that. Now, Green Lantern starring Ryan Reynolds is a movie that on paper probably could have worked. It's a movie that could have been huge and amazing, but it ended up being so bad and so disastrous that they never even attempted to make a Green Lantern movie again. To this day, we've been waiting to see Green Lantern come back, and he just hasn't. Where do you start with this movie? It's goofy comedy that tried to emulate the MCU's comedy at the time that was working for them. Does not work here. The really bad CGI, the terrible costume that just doesn't look good whatsoever, the really bad villain, a plotline that's just really boring, that's matched with a really bad edit, that makes the movie's pace feel like it's a 3.5-hour movie, an ending that, an after-credit scene that was actually pretty cool. Sinestro was cool. Like, I would have liked to have seen that movie. But this is a movie that obviously, you know, just doesn't work, and I wish I could say something good about it, but I haven't seen it in years, and I don't remember any of the good stuff about it. I just remember the bad stuff. It's not a great film. It killed an entire universe before it even started. And let's move on. And the worst one that I could think of right now is Catwoman. Of course, the Halle Berry Catwoman movie is so bad. There's actually an interesting story around this one. There was supposed to be a Catwoman movie shortly after the release of Batman Returns that Tim Burton was going to direct. It was going to star Michelle Pfeiffer, and that on paper kind of sounds cool. There was a script written for it that ended up being like a very big budget actiony CGI fest type of a movie. It sounded really crazy on paper. It kind of sounded like The Boys in a way, like just kind of like deconstructing superheroes and the superhero genre. So it might have been really original at the time, but the script was like way too big for Tim Burton. They decided not to make it. Lo and behold, all these years later, we get Catwoman by Halle Berry, and it is just what a fun movie, at least. I could say that about it. It's fun. There were a lot of things about this movie that just didn't work for it, but I'll say this on the front, this movie was a mistake to make from the get-go. This was right after Batman and Robin kind of killed the run that Batman had been on. People are kind of over that world and those characters and this style of that world. At that point in time, they were really hungry for something different, which they would eventually get in Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins. But instead, they got this first in 2004, a movie that was really goofy, very over-sexualized, which I don't think people were really, maybe some people were into, but people were not that into in a movie like this. They kind of wanted to see a more grounded and realistic version of Catwoman. I think they would have been down to see Michelle Pfeiffer's version of Catwoman kind of play in like a bigger, you know, movie for herself. But this movie just looks bad. It looks really cheap. The acting, Halle Berry just does not really care. You can tell in this movie. A lot of the action is poorly shot. It's poorly made. The story is boring and nonsensical. The villain is not good. The ending of the movie sucks. It's just not very good. And there's a reason we haven't gotten a Catwoman movie since, and maybe we won't. I would like to see one with the Catwoman from the Batman. I think that would be an interesting movie and an interesting story, like you could probably write. And it's probably why we haven't gotten a Catwoman movie or TV show or anything since. And honestly, that kind of sucks, because I think this character has a lot of potential, especially with the newer versions that we've seen, both in The Dark Knight Rises with Anne Hathaway and the newest one in the Batman. I think both of those versions of the character you could tell a pretty interesting story with if you get the right people involved. But this is not it. It is certainly one of the worst comic book movies ever made. But yeah, I'm exhausted. I don't like talking about bad movies for this long. Let me know which ones I missed. I know there's a ton that I didn't talk about, a ton that are usually on these lists, but let me know down below. That's it. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.